if you're in a crash, do not give a recorded statement to the insurance company.
Hi, everybody. I'm Christine Haas here for Ask the Lawyers. And today I'm joined by Brian Davis of the Davis Law Group out of Asheville, North Carolina. Brian, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
We want to talk about bikers' rights today after an accident. Tell me a little bit about the motorcycle car accident scenario and how bikers and SEAMs might get a bad reputation after an accident.
Well, people often associate, people on motorcycles with dangerous, daredevil, reckless driving type individuals. And that's because there are a few of those out there. Most of them are on really souped up sport bikes who treat, our streets and highways like they would a track or a racetrack. But the reality is most people on motorcycles are just normal, everyday folks who enjoy the freedom that you feel when you're on a motorcycle. We have a lot of Harley riders, a lot of, big cruiser bike motorcyclists, especially here in Western North Carolina, where we have the beautiful Blue Ridge Parkway, which is a great place to ride. So, unfortunately, like with a lot of other things, a few bad apples can kind of ruin it for everybody.
Yeah, stereotype out there. Talk about the fault process, how it's determined who is at fault, especially in these types of scenarios, because obviously there are a lot of different angles, I'm sure, that you don't necessarily run into with vehicles.
Yeah, there are. A lot of times what we see in motorcycle crashes is a biker hitting the brakes, locking the bike up, and either colliding with a vehicle that has pulled out in front of the motorcycle or locking it up and going down and perhaps off the road or into an oncoming lane to avoid a vehicle that has turned in front of them. That's the most common car-bike scenario we see. And in that situation, unfortunately, insurance companies, even when a car has pulled out in front of a motorcycle, will often point the finger back at the motorcyclist and say, look, you weren't paying attention, you didn't brake properly, you did something wrong, therefore you're really responsible for this. So that's what we see most often.
And then if a biker did make maybe even a partial mistake, as you mentioned, sometimes you quick maneuvers, how is that determined when it comes to a claim if they're partially at fault?
Well, in North Carolina, that's really, really important because North Carolina is one of three states left in the country that still follow the pure contributory negligence model. And what that means is that if you're even 1/10 of 1% at fault for a crash here in North Carolina, in other words, if the biker did anything at all, just the slightest thing wrong, insurance companies will use that against you to deny the claim. And it's a really big deal. And what the takeaway is that bikers, if you're in a crash, do not give a recorded statement to the insurance company because they will use your own words against you. Get with a lawyer, figure out what the best approach is, and let the lawyer do the talking to the insurance company.
Sure. Speaking of that insurance claim and worrying about that, in the state of North Carolina, do bikers have to wear a helmet?
They are required by law in North Carolina to wear a helmet.
And what happens and what happens if they get into an accident and they're not wearing a helmet? Does that come into play with the insurance claim?
Well, it really depends on what the injuries are. In North Carolina, you're also required to wear a seatbelt if you're in a car. If you're not wearing a seatbelt and you're in a crash, that is not used against you. That's not even admissible in court. And sometimes the same thing applies to a motorcyclist if they're not wearing a helmet. If you don't have a head injury, if you break your leg, then the fact that you didn't have on a helmet at the time of the crash has no bearing on your injuries.
Right.
If you end up with a brain injury and you didn't have on a helmet, then they can use that against you.
Right. That makes sense. And of course, everybody wants to play it as safe as possible. But, they start wondering after an accident, do I really need an attorney? Maybe I made this one mistake or that type of thing. And then they think, I'm just going to handle it and settle it there. What advice do you give to people who think that they can do it on their own, especially in these types of unique scenarios?
You're taking a big risk.
Yeah.
If you try to handle a motorcycle crash case on your own, the most likely outcome is going to be that the insurance company is going to get that recorded statement because they're not going to talk to you without a recorded statement. as an individual. They're just going to say, no, we're not going to deal with your claim until you give a recorded statement. Then they get the statement, they use it against you, and you're screwed.
Yeah.
So the point is, get a lawyer, let the lawyer deal with the insurance company so you don't make a mistake and ruin your case.
Aside from not getting an attorney, what are some of the biggest mistakes you see biker accident victims make in this process?
Biggest mistake, by and large, is giving that recorded statement right after a crash. Because at that point, a lot of times bikers are in the hospital. Insurance adjuster is calling on the phone. Maybe their wife or their significant other is answering the phone and handing it to the biker, and the biker's making a statement, oftentimes while they're still in the hospital, and oftentimes under, the influence of pain medications and things like that. So that's the biggest mistake we see.
Anything else you'd like to offer to our folks today?
Be safe out there. Look as far down the road as you can. As a biker myself, I've owned multiple motorcycles basically since I was 16 years old. I know how dangerous it is, and you've got to treat every car that's out there as if they're gunning for you. So defensive driving on a motorcycle is absolutely essential, and you've got to do it all the time.
That's great advice. Brian Davis of the Davis Law Group out of Asheville, North Carolina. Thank you for your insight and your advice today. We appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Be safe out there.
Thank you. And thanks for watching this episode of Ask the Lawyers. I'm Christine Haas. Have a great day.